You're not detaining him. He's disabled and he hasn't broken any law. You need probable cause. Do you have it? Or are you just hoping nobody records this? Back away from him, right now.
3 federal agents. 1 man in a motorized wheelchair. 31 minutes on a Memphis sidewalk in 91-degree heat. That is where this story begins. But it is not where it ends. On the morning of July 14, 2025, in front of a corner pharmacy on a busy commercial block in Memphis, Tennessee, ICE agents surrounded a 54-year-old black American man who could not stand, could not flee, and had done nothing wrong. They demanded immigration documentation from a man born in this city. They kept him in direct sunlight, while his nerve pain intensified. They did not consider shade. They did not consider his wheelchair. They did not consider what their own agency's guidelines required of them. What 2 Black Panther Party members did next, calmly, deliberately, with phones raised and a civil rights lawyer on the line, is the reason this story exists in documented form. And what those documents eventually revealed about this incident, and the one that came before it, is why a federal settlement of $1.9 million was signed in December 2025. This is not a simple story. It is a procedural one. And the procedure, when followed all the way through, has weight. July in Memphis is not casual heat. It is not the dry, manageable warmth of a southwestern afternoon. It is dense. Pressing. The kind of heat that climbs off concrete and sits on you. By 10 in the morning on a mid-July day, temperatures are already pushing 90 degrees, humidity locked in at 60%, sunlight doing things to asphalt and sidewalk that make the air ahead of you look uncertain. People who grow up in Memphis know the rhythm. You move fast between air conditioning. You don't linger in direct sun. You find shade before you need it. Jamie Figueredo did not have that option on July 14th. Before we go further, if you believe a disabled man deserves the same constitutional protections as anyone else, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you think stories like this one need to be heard. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Every share, every subscription is a signal that this kind of accountability matters. Now let's get into it. Jamie Figueredo was 54 years old, born at the Regional Medical Center in Memphis in 1971. He had spent most of his working life in construction, framing houses, pouring foundations, the kind of labor that leaves marks on a body even before anything goes wrong. 11 years ago, something went very wrong. A job site accident fractured his lumbar vertebrae. The surgeries that followed stabilized him. They did not restore him. He lost function in his lower extremities permanently, and the motorized wheelchair became the instrument of his daily life. The nerve pain was chronic. It responded poorly to heat. It required consistent medication. And on the morning of July 14, 2025, Figueredo had done what he did every month, navigated his chair along the familiar route to the corner pharmacy to collect his prescription. A routine errand. The kind that takes 20 minutes on a normal day. That day would not be normal. The black SUV pulled to the curb at 9:47 in the morning. 3 figures stepped out in sequence, unhurried, deliberate, the practiced economy of movement that comes with years of field work. Their body cameras activated as their boots hit the sidewalk. Agent Thomas Riley moved first. 12 years with ICE enforcement, white, late 40s, the kind of bearing that suggests a man accustomed to being the first through any door. Behind him, Laura Bennett, 6 years in, early 30s, positioning to Riley's left. On the right flank, Carlos Vargas, mid-30s, 7 years, completing the formation before Figueredo had time to process what was forming around him. Riley stepped directly into the path of the motorized wheelchair. The chair stopped. It had no choice. Figueredo looked up from behind its controls at a badge, a vest, and a face that gave him nothing. The sidewalk that morning was functioning the way Memphis commercial sidewalks function in July, loud, moving, vendors and pedestrians sharing the same block, the pharmacy behind Figueredo still 20 feet away, its air-conditioned interior unreachable now. The prescription bag sat in the cup holder attached to his armrest. He had already collected it. He was heading home. He would not be heading home for another 31 minutes. The agents cited intelligence. vague in its particulars, specific in its parameters, an undocumented individual, black male, medium build, between 40 and 60 years old, operating in this part of the city, possibly going by a name approximating Jamie. The tip had come through a field informant. It had not been cross-referenced with precision. It had not been verified against any existing file connected to the man now sitting motionless in front of them on a sun-exposed sidewalk. Figueredo produced his state-issued identification without hesitation. He had nothing to hesitate about. Born in the city, raised in the city, a man whose entire documented life existed within a 30-mile radius of the spot where he now sat. He was confused. He communicated his confusion. He was also irritated, and he communicated that too, not with aggression, but with the flat, weary irritation of a man who understood, somewhere beneath the immediate strangeness of the moment, what was actually happening to him. The agents did not step back. Riley examined the ID and handed it to Bennett. The formation did not change. The questions continued. What Figueredo began to feel, alongside the confusion and irritation, was something more clarifying and more troubling, the specific awareness of his own immobility. He could not stand. He could not step back. He could not create distance between himself and the agents surrounding him, even if he had wanted to, even if the situation had called for it. The wheelchair, which gave him independence on every ordinary day of his life, was now a boundary he could not cross. The agents had not positioned themselves to accommodate it. They had positioned themselves in relation to it, using the chair's fixed presence to their advantage without appearing to do so deliberately. The heat had its own logic. 10 minutes into the stop, Figueredo could feel it working on his nerve pain the way it always did, not a sudden spike, but a slow increase, the kind that builds without announcing itself and announces itself later with full force. The concrete reflected light upward as well as heat. There was no awning within reach. The pharmacy entrance was behind him, and blocked. He was stationary in direct sunlight with 3 federal agents around him and a prescription bag that now felt, in its small plastic innocuousness, like the punchline of something deeply unfunny. Riley, Bennett, and Vargas operated with the procedural confidence of agents who believed their intelligence was sound. They had no particular reason, from where they stood, to doubt it. The tip described a man matching Figueredo's general description in this general area. He had been slow-moving, a detail the informant had noted, a detail the agents had not yet connected to the wheelchair in front of them with any analytical weight. Slow movement, in their framework, carried implication. That the implication had an alternative and obvious explanation, that a motorized wheelchair moves at the pace a motorized wheelchair moves, did not appear to register as a variable worth examining. They continued the stop. Figueredo's hands, resting on the arms of his chair, were still. He had learned, over 11 years of navigating a world built for people who could stand, when stillness was the only available response. He told the agents he was disabled. He told them he was an American citizen. He told them the medication in the cup holder was prescribed to him, by a doctor, at a clinic with a Memphis address, filled at the pharmacy 15 feet behind him. The agent's formation did not shift. Riley's hand moved toward his belt. Not to a weapon. To the handcuff case at his side, a gesture that in the vocabulary of enforcement carries unmistakable meaning. Figueredo tracked the movement. He understood it. And in the understanding of it, something shifted in the texture of the moment from confusion and irritation into something that neither word was adequate to describe. He was being treated as a man who might be taken somewhere. By federal agents. On a public sidewalk. In front of a pharmacy where he had collected the same prescription every month for 2 years. In the city where he was born. The heat was at 91 degrees. The humidity had not moved. The concrete held every degree it had absorbed since sunrise, and it radiated it back upward at the level where a man in a wheelchair lives, which is lower than the level where standing people feel it. The body cameras recorded all of it. Across the block, 2 men in black had noticed. Richard Hurd saw the formation first. He was 33 years old, a community organizer with the Black Panther Party's Memphis chapter, and he had been conducting outreach on this block for 3 hours by the time the black SUV pulled up. He knew the neighborhood. He knew the pharmacy. He did not know Jamie Figueredo by name, but he recognized, immediately and without ambiguity, what he was looking at: a disabled man, surrounded, unable to move, in direct sunlight, with federal agents closing the perimeter around him. Heard's phone was recording before he had taken 3 steps toward the scene. Billy James, 27, moved beside him. James was quieter than Heard by nature, more observer than speaker, but no less deliberate. He took the other angle, his phone steady, capturing the formation from the side while Heard approached the front. They had not discussed tactics. They did not need to. This was what their outreach work had trained them for, not the dramatic intervention, but the present, documented, legally grounded one. Heard did not rush. He moved at a pace that communicated purpose without aggression. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to be relevant, and far enough to remain, under law, unambiguously within his rights. He was not touching anyone. He was not blocking anyone. He was a citizen observing a public interaction between federal agents and a civilian on a public sidewalk, and the phone in his hand was a legal instrument of that observation. What Heard communicated to the agents, without raising his voice, without physical contact, in the flat, precise language of someone who had studied these moments, was a demand for probable cause and a demand for badge numbers. He made clear that the man in the wheelchair was an American citizen. He made clear that the agent's continued detention of that man, in these conditions, without adequate justification, was something he intended to document in its entirety. The agents directed him to step back. They identified the situation as a federal immigration matter and warned that his continued proximity constituted interference. Heard did not step back. He also did not step forward. He remained exactly where he was, phone level, tone even, and repeated his questions. By this point, the sidewalk had changed. What had been the ordinary commercial traffic of a Memphis morning, people passing, errands running, the ambient noise of a working block, had slowed. Pedestrians had noticed. Several had stopped. A few had pulled out their own phones, following the logic of the moment without any coordination. Documentation was becoming the dominant activity on this stretch of sidewalk, and the agents, who had arrived with the assumption of procedural authority, were becoming the subjects of it. Tyrone, a pharmacy employee who had worked the counter for 4 years, stepped out through the glass door and into the heat. He was not a lawyer. He was not an organizer. He was a man who recognized, with immediate certainty, the regular customer sitting in the motorized wheelchair 20 feet away, the same man who came in on the 14th of every month, same chair, same prescription, same brief exchange at the pickup window. He said what he knew. He said it clearly. He said it to anyone near enough to hear it, including the agents, including the camera. He confirmed, without ceremony, that the man in the wheelchair was a known, regular customer of that pharmacy, a face he had seen monthly for 2 years. The agents had not asked Tyrone anything. He had offered the information anyway, because the situation in front of him did not make sense, and he was willing to say so. James had connected his phone to a call by the 12th minute. Civil rights attorney William Parsons was on the other end, listening in real time, offering guidance through the speaker at a volume that James managed carefully, audible to him, documentable by the phone, available as record. Parsons was not present. His voice was. And the presence of legal counsel, even at a distance, shifted something in the invisible arithmetic of the scene. Figueredo, through all of this, was still. His hands had not moved from the armrests. His face held the particular expression of a man absorbing pain while refusing to give that pain any interpretive use to the people around him. The nerve pain had been building for 15 minutes now. Heat plus immobility plus stress, the combination was not theoretical for him. He had lived the consequences of that combination before. He knew what the next several hours would cost him, and he had not yet been released. Heard checked the time. He checked it again 4 minutes later. He communicated clearly, for the camera's record, how long the detention had been ongoing. He asked what remote verification options existed. He asked why, given that the subject of the stop was a wheelchair user in direct sunlight, no accommodation had been offered, no shade, no repositioning, no alternative to holding him in the heat until the process resolved itself. The agents had no recorded answer to any of these questions. Think about what you just witnessed in this account. Do you believe that law enforcement should have mandatory disability accommodation protocols before they ever approach someone? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this kind of accountability journalism matters to you, subscribe, because what comes next in this case is where the real reckoning begins. The guidance that came through the agent's radio did not resolve the situation immediately. It introduced, into the procedural chain above the three agents on the sidewalk, an awareness that this stop, now 19 minutes old, documented from multiple angles, observed by a crowd, with a civil rights attorney on the line, carried liability. Someone higher in the chain began asking questions that the agents on the ground could not answer cleanly. Hurd registered the shift in the radio's tone before he could make out its words. He recognized what it meant because he had been in enough of these situations to understand what institutional hesitation sounds like from the outside. He made clear to the agents, and to the cameras, that he was prepared to be arrested for his presence, but that he was not prepared to step away and allow the stop to continue unwitnessed. Riley's hand had moved away from the handcuff case at some point in the last several minutes. The formation had loosened incrementally, not by design, but by the slow, physical effect of a situation becoming something other than what it had been expected to be. At minute 26, the verification came back. Figueiredo's identity confirmed. American citizen. Memphis-born. No record of any immigration status issue. No match to the intelligence that had initiated the stop. At minute 31, the agent stepped back. Figueiredo navigated his chair off the sidewalk without looking at them. James noted the badge numbers on camera. Hurd noted the time. The crowd dispersed the way crowds do, without announcement, back into the ordinary morning that had been interrupted. The prescription bag remained in the cup holder, where it had been the entire time. The body cameras had recorded everything. Figueiredo was home by 11:15. The route back was the same route he always took, familiar corners, familiar inclines, the particular rhythm of a neighborhood navigated so many times that the chair moved through it almost by memory. But the man in the chair was not moving the way he usually moved. He was slower, more deliberate. The nerve pain that had been building for 31 minutes on the sidewalk had not stopped building when the agents stepped back. It had continued its logic into the afternoon, and would continue into the night and into the days that followed, the body's accounting of what the heat and the stress and the sustained immobility had cost it. He set the prescription bag on the kitchen counter. He did not open it immediately. William Parsons arrived at the apartment within the hour. He came with a legal pad, a recorder, and the kind of focused quiet that experienced civil rights attorneys bring to a situation they understand to be serious. He had been on the phone during the final 12 minutes of the detention. He had heard enough. He had also, by the time he arrived at Figueiredo's door, already been in contact with the ACLU's Memphis office. The footage from Hurd's phone and James's phone was reviewed in sequence. Parsons moved through it methodically, pausing, noting timestamps, identifying the specific moments that would carry legal weight. The formation. Riley's hand at the cuff case. The absence of shade accommodation. The failure to shift the location of the stop. The duration. The crowd. Tyrone's statement, visible and audible on camera. The radio call and the loosening that followed it. The 31-minute runtime documented, to the second, by the phone Hurd had started recording before he reached the scene. The lawsuit was filed on July 28, 2025. 14 days after the stop. The claims were three in their primary structure. The first was a Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful detention without reasonable, articulable suspicion specific to Figueiredo, as distinct from the vague demographic description that had initiated the stop. The second was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically the failure of the agents to provide reasonable accommodations during the stop, accommodations that ICE's own guidelines, when last updated, had specifically addressed. The third was intentional infliction of emotional distress, rooted in the documented physical consequences of the stop on a man whose condition made the agent's procedural choices not merely inconvenient but medically harmful. What discovery produced was methodical and, in the way of procedural revelations, devastating. The agents, Riley, Bennett, and Vargas, had not undergone disability sensitivity training within the previous 24 months. ICE's internal records confirmed this. The requirement existed. The training had not occurred. The gap between what the agency mandated and what the agency had actually implemented was not a gray area. It was a documented failure, and it appeared in the records the way documented failures always appear, quietly, without drama, as a row in a spreadsheet that should have shown completion and showed absence instead. The intelligence that had initiated the stop was traced to its source during discovery. The informant tip had been generated in reference to a different individual. Same general description, different name, different neighborhood, different history. The connection to Figueiredo had been an administrative error in the processing of the tip. No analyst had caught it. No supervisor had flagged it. It had moved through the system with the confidence of accurate information until it produced 3 agents on a Memphis sidewalk surrounding a man born in Memphis whose only offense was moving slowly on a motorized wheelchair. Depositions began in September. Figueiredo's testimony was given over 2 sessions. He described the pain flare-ups that had lasted 4 days after the stop, days in which his regular medication dose had been insufficient, in which sleep had been disrupted, in which the ordinary management of his condition had required adjustment that his doctor later documented in writing. He described the particular humiliation of being surrounded while seated, the way the agent's physical positions had placed their hands and belts and equipment at eye level for him, the way the formation had created a perimeter he could not escape and had not been expected to escape. He described looking at the pharmacy door and knowing he had already collected his medication, that he had done the ordinary thing he had come to do, and that none of it had mattered. Heard testified as a witness. He described the intervention as community duty, not bravado, not confrontation seeking, but the specific responsibility he believed came with the training and the role he had taken on. He described his fear, too, which he did not minimize. Federal agents. A public confrontation. The possibility of arrest. He had calculated those risks and moved forward anyway, because the alternative was to watch something happen that he had the capacity to effect. James corroborated Heard's account in its particulars and added the technical record, the timestamps, the angles, the phone call log showing when Parsons had joined, the duration of the connection. His testimony was brief and precise. Tyrone's contribution, given in a brief deposition, carried the quiet impact of its simplicity. He had known the man in the wheelchair for 2 years. He had seen him every month. There was nothing complicated about his knowledge of Jamie Figueiredo's identity, and there was nothing complicated about his decision to step outside into the heat and say so. Parsons pressed, in deposition, on the question of procedure, specifically, why the agents had applied able-bodied suspect protocols rigidly to a stop involving a wheelchair user in direct sunlight, and what alternative procedures existed within ICE's own documentation for exactly this scenario. The agents' answers were uncomfortable in their honesty. They had not thought about it that way. The protocols they knew were the protocols they used. The fact that those protocols did not account for the human being in front of them had not, in the moment, registered as a procedural gap. It had registered as a procedural norm. Outside the deposition rooms, the story had found its audience. Local media had covered the filing. Disability rights organizations had picked it up from there, circulating the footage, both the body cam footage obtained through the lawsuit and the phone footage that had been publicly documented from the moment Heard press record. The combination produced a case study that organizations had been waiting to have in documented form, a clear, timed, multi-angle record of what ADA noncompliance and federal enforcement actually looked like on a sidewalk, in real time, in July heat. Figueiredo attended a community forum in late September. He had not sought the platform. A disability advocacy group had asked, and he had agreed, because the alternative, letting the case move through its legal channels while the broader pattern went unnamed, felt incomplete. He spoke carefully, in the measured tone of a man who had thought precisely about what he wanted to say. He talked about what it meant to be unable to move when movement would have changed the situation. He talked about the wheelchair as something the agents had looked at without seeing. He talked about what accountability required, and what it tended to produce, when it came late. The room was full. It included people who had no connection to the case and had come anyway. By November 2025, the case had settled into the phase that civil rights litigation settles into when the evidence is clear and the public record is established, the phase of calculation. ICE's legal team had spent 3 months with the footage. They had spent 3 months with the deposition transcripts. They had spent 3 months with the documentary record of what the agency's own guidelines required and what the agents had or had not done to satisfy those requirements. The calculation they arrived at was not a question of guilt or innocence in the abstract. It was a question of exposure, what a jury in Memphis, presented with 31 minutes of body cam footage and phone footage and a man describing 4 days of nerve pain, was likely to conclude, and what that conclusion was likely to cost. The number they arrived at, as a settlement offer, was $1.9 million. The structure of the settlement reflected the structure of the lawsuit. $700,000 in compensatory damages, the direct, documented harm, medical costs, lost function, the specific physical and psychological toll of the stop and its aftermath. $500,000 for ADA violations, the procedural failure that had transformed a legally questionable stop into an illegal one. $700,000 in punitive damages, the signal that the failure had not been accidental in its character, that the absence of training and the absence of protocol, and the absence of basic accommodation had consequences beyond the individual case. Figueiredo's legal team accepted on December 5, 2025. The consequences for the agents were institutional rather than criminal. Riley, Bennett, and Vargas were placed on probation, issued formal reprimands, and assigned to a mandatory retraining program covering disability accommodation, ADA compliance in the field, and protocols for stops involving individuals with limited mobility. The Memphis IC field office was directed to revise its operational guidelines to include specific procedures for wheelchair users, heat exposure, remote verification options, and the documentation required when a stop involves a subject who cannot stand or move under their own power. No charges were filed against Hurd or James. Their observation had been exactly that, observation. Protected, documented, consequential observation. The legal affirmation of their conduct as protected citizens was not a dramatic moment. It was a quiet one, the kind that matters most in its plainness. 2 men had done what they had the right to do, and the system, when pressed to account for itself, had confirmed it. Then the depositions produced something that had not been in the original filing. It came out in a line of questioning about Figueiredo's prior interactions with law enforcement. A standard discovery inquiry, the kind that attorneys conduct to establish context and history. Figueiredo had answered honestly. 14 months before July 14, 2025, in a different part of Memphis, he had been stopped by different IC agents. The stop had been brief. There had been no probable cause then either. His medication had been in the bag then too, though it was a different pharmacy and a different route. His identification had eventually resolved the situation, and he had gone home. He had not reported it. He had told no one. He had absorbed it the way people absorb things they believe will produce no result, quietly, privately, adding it to the weight they carry rather than the record they build. He had doubted the system's interest in what had happened to him. He had doubted that a report, without a camera, without witnesses, without the specific machinery that converts experience into documentation, would become anything other than a file somewhere that no one opened. The second stop had a camera. It had 2 cameras. It had a lawyer and a pharmacy employee and a crowd of bystanders and 31 minutes of federal body cam footage. It had become, in its documentation, everything the first stop had not been. Parsons entered the prior stop into the record. The pattern it established was not legally operative in the settlement. The first stop had no documentation, no formal complaint, no corroboration. But its presence in the deposition shifted the meaning of the case for everyone who was following it. A single stop was a failure. 2 stops, 14 months apart, involving the same man, the same city, the same absence of probable cause, was something the word failure was not adequate to describe. Disability organizations took the case into their advocacy materials. The documented prior stop, combined with Figueiredo's account that he had not reported it because he had not believed reporting would help, became a central question in their policy arguments. How many stops had happened without cameras? How many people had absorbed the cost and told no one? How many files existed nowhere because the people who could have created them had concluded, correctly or not, that no one would open them? Figueiredo used the settlement funds with the methodical care of a man who had spent 11 years making practical decisions about what his body required. Home modifications came first, ramp improvements, doorway adjustments, the specific architectural accommodations that his current setup had left incomplete. A new wheelchair followed, custom-fitted, with climate-responsive seating that managed temperature regulation better than the chair he had used for 4 years. Medical care, a pain management specialist he had been unable to afford regularly, became a consistent line in his budget. A portion of the funds went to the ACLU's Memphis office. A portion went to the Black Panther Party's community outreach program, specifically to the chapter Heard and James operated from. Heard received the information about the donation without fanfare. He and Figueiredo were not close, in the way that people who have shared an extraordinary moment are not always close afterward. The moment connects them, but they remain separate people with separate lives. They passed each other in the neighborhood on occasion. The acknowledgement between them required no elaboration. The pharmacy added a printed notice near the pickup window, a laminated card listing basic rights during encounters with law enforcement, with a number for the ACLU's Tennessee office. Tyrone had made the request to the manager. The manager had agreed. The card had been there since October, and would remain there. What the case left behind was less a resolution than a marker. ICE's Memphis field office had new protocols. 3 agents had gone through training they had never been required to complete before. A $1.9 million settlement had moved through the federal accounting system and established a cost for what had happened on that sidewalk. Disability advocacy groups had a documented case to cite and legislative testimony. The body cam footage and the phone footage existed in the permanent record of what federal enforcement had done and what community presence had prevented. Jamie Figueiredo picked up his prescription on the 14th of December, 2025, 9 days after the settlement was finalized. The same pharmacy. The same route. The same motorized chair, though newer, with better padding and better heat management than the one he had navigated to this block in July. He collected the bag from Tyrone, who handed it across the counter without ceremony, because that was what the moment required. An ordinary exchange in an air-conditioned pharmacy on an ordinary December morning in Memphis. He put the bag in the cup holder and wheeled toward home. The street outside was quieter than it had been in July. The heat was gone. The concrete did not shimmer. The air did not press down on the people moving through it. And the man in the motorized chair moved through it too, past the spot on the sidewalk where 3 agents had stepped out of an SUV, past the place where the formation had closed around him, past the exact location where, 5 months earlier, a reach toward a handcuff case had clarified exactly what his citizenship was worth when no one was watching. Someone had been watching. Someone had moved toward it instead of away. That was the record. That was the case. That was what $1.9 million looked like before it became a number. It looked like 31 minutes, and a camera, and 2 men who decided that what they were seeing required them to stay. Justice, when it works, is not spectacular. It is documented. It is slow. It arrives in the form of a settlement agreement signed on a Friday in December, in language precise enough to be boring, in an amount large enough to register consequence. It arrives. And then life continues, with the modifications that accountability makes possible, along the same streets where the failure occurred. Figueiredo turned the corner toward home. The chair moved at the pace a motorized wheelchair moves. It was enough.